Hello Booktube. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Marilyn. Isn't reading wonderful? Sometimes I forget how wonderful the experience of reading is and how grateful I am to be able that my mother taught me to read, because before there was an internet, before I was a creator on the internet, there was still books. And sometimes I forget how important books have always been to my life, to get me through life. And this week I had it wasn't a revelation because I knew this already, but sometimes you go through a little bit of a slump. I can't say I was really in a slump, but I wasn't reading books that were making me feel that feeling. I can't explain that feeling that I'm not alone, that there were people before me, many, many years before me, who had the same feelings that I have. Okay, have I gushed enough? Let me tell you about a book I'm reading. Yes, this is a Friday Reads, and I have read some wonderful books in the last maybe 10 days. When you see this, it's going to be maybe February 1st. Though I'm filming this the last day of January, and January has been a revelation to me in many ways. I was feeling down about a lot of things, and then I found some books that made me fall in love with reading again, but more importantly made me feel grateful that I value reading. Because so many people don't, and they're missing out. They're missing out on a wonderful experience, on, I can't explain it, but knowing that you're, like I said, you're not alone, but also empathy, feeling empathy for people. And I think that's lacking in today's world, empathy. Well, I feel empathy for this reader, and her name was Rhys. And if it wasn't for an accident, I would never have found this writer. You might have known her because she wrote a prequel to Jane Eyre, The Wide Sargasso Sea. I haven't read it. It has mixed reviews, but it's the only book that she was famous for. But I got this book out of the library, and it's the complete novels. I read the first one at none of her books before The Wide Sargasso Sea were big hits at all. And she was a pretty depressing writer. And the book that I read, Good Morning, Midnight, I talked about already. I felt it was depressing. I felt the writing was beautiful. And I'm going to talk about how writing is so important in liking a book, at least for me. When the writing is gorgeous and beautiful, and I feel that the author is being real with me, it's just wonderful. And I'm going to talk about, I read Voyage in the Dark. Voyage in the Dark was written when Rhys, in her early career, well, she put it away. It was very autobiographical, as all her books are. And even Wide Sargasso Sea has some autobiographical things in it, I heard. But the thing that really gets me is how modernist this book was, because this was the first book that she wrote, but not the first book that was published. And I think that's because there's things in this book that I can't believe were written in, and I think this was written before World War I. Like, if she came to England, let me just tell you a little bit about her. She's from a small island in the Caribbean called Dominica. She was born there, and I think that experience really affected her writing, and I'll show you a little bit about that, but also her life. And there's things in this book regarding racism. And what I loved about it was that she wasn't the racist, but of course she comes from a family of a Scottish doctor. This is in real life, a Scottish doctor, and her mother was, they said, half Creole, which means that the mother was born in Dominica. And there's some hints that the mother or her mother in the book, not in real life, who knows in real life, might have been, as she says, colored. She confronts a relative about that. So I do know that in real life I read that she didn't get along with her mother. Anyway, the book is about a young girl, well, we know it's Jean Rhys, who came from Dominica to England when she was 16, and this takes place when she's 19. So this is like was written a few years after she came to England, and she was a failed chorus girl, partly because of her speech. She didn't speak like other people spoke in England, and she talks about hating England, yet she didn't want to go back to Dominica. Anyway, let me just read you. So it's about the beginning of her life, and I heard she put her book in a suitcase and didn't take it out for at least 10 years. So it was really close to her heart, or cutting too close to the bone. And I'm just saying this, I don't know this for sure. I read this. So she comes and she doesn't have too much money. Her family sort of let her out without money, and she has to find her own way. And she is a very depressing girl. She's depressed. And if you ever went through a depression, you might understand more about why her books are so, depressing. I think this is less depressing than her other book that I read, Good Morning Midnight. But the writing is so spectacular that I had to share a little bit of it with you. And this part is not a quote that's, like if you look at famous quotes, it's not one of the famous quotes, though I have one of those too for you, a short one. There's everything in this book. There's sexism, there's racism, there's what it's like to live on a small island, which I do, and that's why this line got me. It's also about falling in love and being left. It's about how heartbreak. It's about everything. I don't want to spoil the book for you, because I really think that this book should be read more. And let me just say one more thing about how I found this book. It was from another book by Elaine Crack that I talked about, Princess of 72nd Street. And that book is no way as good as this book. The writing is not as good. But one thing, and that's what's so wonderful about Booktube and finding out about different books, is that when I found out that I liked The Princess of 72nd Street, I thought it was a very unique book. And when I found out that Jean Rhys was Elaine Crack's favorite author, of course I went down the rabbit hole, and that's how I found it. And that's what's so wonderful about being a creator on Booktube, or even being a subscriber on Booktube, just loving books. Okay, so she has, there's someone she falls in love with. I won't go into it, but she starts talking about Dominica and the island, and the guy that she's in love with is not that interested, and after they go upstairs, as she puts it, he sends her home in a taxi. And that's where I'm going to read from. All the way back in the taxi, I was still thinking about home, and when I got into bed, I lay awake thinking about it, about how sad the sun can be, especially in the afternoon, but in a different way from the sadness of cold places. quite different. And the way the bats fly out at sunset, 2 by 2, very stately. And the smell of the store down on the bay. I'll take 4 yards of the pink, please, Miss Jessie. And the smell of Francine, sweet, Astrid sweet. And that hibiscus once. It was so red, so proud, and its long gold tongue hung out. It was so red that even the sky was just a background for it, and I can't believe it's dead. And the sound of rain on the galvanized iron roof, how it would go on and on, thundering on the roof. That was when it was sad, when you lay awake at night and remembered things. That was when it was sad, when you stood by the bed and undressed thinking. I don't want to go into it anymore, but the descriptions are so vivid. I have hibiscus in my yard, and the red is just like she talked about, and I felt for this girl all through the book. Another short quote that I'll just tell you about is this one. And I saw that all my life I had known that this was going to happen, and that I'd been afraid for a long time. I'd been afraid for a long time. There's fear, of course, with everybody. But now it has grown. It has grown gigantic. It filled me, and it filled the whole world. I mean, that's wonderful writing to me. And this book is I would say it's a novella, and it's definitely a 5-star read for me. And I recommend this author, even though she can be a little depressing, but she talks about what it was like to live before World War I, a little after World War I, and going into World War II. Trying to just live and without any help from other people, having to make it on your own when you're young and you're depressed and maybe you drink too much. But I really recommend, it was hard to read this. I read this in print, and it was hard to handle this. You know, you have to hold it and read it, but it was so worth it. It was so worth it. If I can get this on audio, I would love to. I'm going to read everything that this author wrote, even her letters, everything. And that's the way I feel. Okay, so have I talked about that enough? The other book I read on Kindle that I'm going to talk about, and it will be here. It's The Empire of Pain. And the author is, it's The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty by Patrick Radden Keefe. And he's the author of Say Nothing, a book about the Irish Troubles that I've never read, but I've heard about on Booktube. And I think that I'm more likely to want to read it now. So what I loved about this book is that it's well researched, and even though it's a style that is not my kind of style, which is a family saga in a way, it's much more than a family saga. It's a page turner, and it's about 3 brothers, 3 generations actually of wealth built on greed. And so I was pulled into it because the 3 Sackler brothers were born in Brooklyn, and I'm from Brooklyn, and they're Jewish, and my mother was Jewish, so I'm Jewish. And so it was sad to read that these 3 brothers set up this Purdue Pharma company, which was largely responsible for the opioid crisis in the United States. And that's very sad. So all 3 of the original Sackler brothers bought Purdue And they were the ones who ultimately discovered OxyContin. The first drug was something called Contin MS, and then OxyContin, which is a story in and itself, so I won't go into that. And they were all physicians, and physicians do no wrong. They did a lot of wrong. So I found it shocking because as physicians, they were more like an advertising company. And in fact, Arthur, the older brother, who wasn't really part of the OxyContin thing, but he was more of, he was culpable in a lot of ways because he was kind of always selling, and that's what they did with OxyContin. And they even used their position and money that they got from, the dirty money to like buy out the FDA. And they had these salespersons who would go to the doctors and convince them to make these prescriptions and have the doctors give it to their patients, telling them it's not harmful. They lied, and they gave big gifts to these universities and museums. Very interesting how they hid behind these gifts that they gave to these museums, like the Met. That was an interesting part of the book as well. And how even the museums and universities became culpable in this whole horrible empire, painful empire of pain. So the story is how a family can turn into an empire, and the empire can be evil. And the evil was how many people have died from taking this drug, misusing it because it wasn't researched enough or at all, and because these powerful brothers were able to lie and cheat and steal. And also a family saga how ambition can turn evil as well. The only negative for me in the book is there's a lot of people to keep track of. And they're there, and then the next few pages, it's another person. So I still suggest, of course, that you read it. And I'm glad that Kim encouraged me, Kim of Middle of the Book March, encouraged me to keep on reading this book because, yeah, it's 5 stars. That's all I'll say about it. So now I'm going to go to a book I haven't finished yet, but I talked about in my last video where I was finding the ultimate list. I'm going to have that in the cards, the end cards, which I think it always is. That's how much I know about the algorithm. But anyway, this book is, and I'll have it again here, it's Didion and Babitz by Lili Anolik. I haven't finished it yet. It's a story, like I said, about Joan Didion and Eve Babitz, who were in the Los Angeles scene. They became friends, which wasn't really known. And the author was obsessed with Eve Babitz and maybe Joan Didion, but especially Eve Babitz, and she had met her in Eve's later years. Eve was an artist, a muse, as they say, and she took drugs. So this was the 60s, the 70s, and she had relations with many, many famous people. But as the author is trying to say, it's more, she wasn't trying to have them make her famous. She wanted to be with the art world. Okay, let me just tell you what I really dislike about this book, but why I'm still reading it. The author is, let me tell you, she's a very well researched. She did a very well researched job. She was obsessed with Eve Babitz, I think, first, and she wrote a book called Hollywood's Eve, which is a take on Eve Babbitt's Eve's Hollywood that I read in the 70s, and I was blown away by Eve Babitz's writing. Her writing was gorgeous. This author, the way she writes is very, very disturbing to me. I shouldn't say disturbing, irritating, let's put it that way. There's Dear Reader. I said I can take one Dear Reader, but if I'm at 30% into the book and you're still putting yourself into the story so much, it is really annoying. But I'm still reading it. So she'll go, the author will say, like I told you in my, before, remember what I told you. I don't want to hear that in a book that's a biography of someone. I want you to be silent and tell the story. But from the beginning, it was, I did this, and I researched this, and I talked to this person. And I really, really disliked her writing style, even though I kept on reading because it's an interesting story. Don't get me wrong. It's how these two authors became friends and then enemies, and how their lives intersected in the 60s and 70s. And I'm interested in that period. And I remember reading some of Eve Babitz's books, like I said, and I thought she was a wonderful writer. I'm not that much of a fan of Joan Didion, as much as other people might be on Booktube. But I've read a few books. I've read Slouching Toward Bethlehem. I didn't really like her opinions about certain things. But then she was a little older than me, and they both came from very rich backgrounds. So, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to, even if I wanted to, get into that scene that they were in LA. And Eve Babitz also went to New York and did she was also an artist. She did collages. I'm not going to spoil it for you. If you want to read this, and I know that, and I think Kim is reading this right now as well. So I hope I'm not spoiling it for anyone. I'm still reading it, so you can't say that I DNF'd it or anything, because I'm interested in this story. But I really don't think an author that's writing a modern story should be Dear Reader this and Dear Reader that. It turns me off. I don't know if some people it doesn't bother. So if this doesn't bother you, I think my good friend Nathan, a subscriber and friend, said that he read somewhere that she has a smart alecky style. Maybe that's what I don't like. I don't know too much about this author, but I think she's on Instagram and everything. Her name is, like I said, Lili Anolik. So I'm going to wait for the final verdict after I finish the book. Okay, so the other books that I'm still reading, and this is interesting, Bob Dylan's unauthorized yet authorized biography called Bob Dylan, No Direction Home. And what I say it's interesting, it's because this book is actually shortened. It's an abridged version of the original book. And it has the photos. So I say I would buy this book and take out the original that was published in 1986 that maybe if you want more information about. Let me just see. Here's another very typical sulky photo of Bob Dylan. I'm enjoying this, but it's slow going, also because of the weight of this book and my various muscle problems. I'm also continuing Positively 4th Street, which is more about Joan Baez and her sister Mimi Baez Farina, and her husband, Richard Farina, and of course, Bob Dylan. And this, like I said, I love the back and front covers, which shows all of them in a beautiful, colorful hand painting of them both. So this is also slow going, only because I got so interested in other books. Yeah, so I'm also dipping in and out of the Tucci table because I love Stanley Tucci, and he's probably going to be the next book that I'm going to read. So thank you so much for watching. If you've watched till now, please subscribe. I'm at this number for, it's like 9, you know, the last number. And I said, come on already, one person subscribe so I can have an even number. I'm just joking, but I'm not joking about reading. And I'm so happy that I found this community of fellow readers. Make me so happy. And until we meet again on this, finally, we lost our power last night because we had a storm, but we needed the rain. Just not that much all at once. But today is pretty sunny out. It's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I didn't have to really turn on any lights, so I guess we're good. So thank you for watching up to this point, and I will see you in a next video very soon. So aloha from Hawaii.